Case files. An Australian serial killer is on the loose.
What animals could actually be removing the heads off the kangaroos?
I've never seen anything like that before.
But a key suspect has been dead for over 75 years. It's code red in a California harbor.
I said we have thousands of fish in the harbor. 2 or 3 minutes after that, I said we have hundreds of thousands of fish in the harbor. And by the end of it all, we had millions of fish in the harbor.
Fish are running scared. Do they sense something?
Hope I never have to see something like that again.
A community in Minnesota has become a ghost town.
You know, it just doesn't look right. The herons colony looks very, very quiet.
Right at the base of the tree was the severed head of a great blue heron chick. So I was very interested to see what actually happened in the nest.
Find out the answers to this and more of the world's strangest mysteries on Wild Case Files. Australia, Loch Sport, the state of Victoria. The small coastal town is home to only 800 people. It's under siege by a brutal killer. Kangaroo corpses litter the roadside with signature injuries.
I've never seen anything like that before.
It was torn to pieces, or, ripped to shreds.
The killer remains unidentified. One investigator is closing in on the perpetrator, Murray McAllister.
It's really amazing, especially when we don't have any large carnivores in terms of lions or anything else that's in Australia, what animals could actually be removing the heads off the kangaroos. It's just a big fascination.
Murray has been tracking the mystery beast. He recognizes the hallmarks of a typical killing. These are unusual killings. Each corpse looks disturbingly similar.
And the type of carcasses that we've come across are almost like a guillotine has had an impact on the top of the head. It's just been a very clean, precise cut.
Time to question witnesses living near the kill zone. Peter Connell had a clear view of an attack.
I saw a dog-like creature. I thought it was a German Shepherd, but when it opened its mouth to munch on or have a crack at this bush wallaby, I mean, a normal dog will open, say, that far with its jaws to get a bite, where this one come right out and then latched onto it and literally crunch.
Another witness spies the mystery beast up close.
I could see this dog-like creature sort of walking very slowly just up this hill here. It had brown stripes on the back. It had a long tail, had a long head. It was fawny brown in color and the dark chocolate brown stripes. And it stopped it for a minute and looked at me for a minute, walked up a little bit further, had a look around again at me, and just continuously walked very casually up that hill to the back of that other fence. And I just couldn't believe what I had. I was just really in shock.
Based on the evidence, a prime suspect comes instantly to mind. Dingoes. These wild dogs chase their prey with unrelenting ferocity. They circle a flock of sheep and move in for the kill. They tear at the victim's throat to bring it down. They are the kangaroo's deadliest enemy, but they devour their victims and don't just take the head.
I don't think a dingo would have done this because there would have been a lot of tear marks and rip marks at the carcasses. These appear to be very clean cut in terms of the way that they've actually been amputated from the kangaroo's main body.
Other evidence points to the dingo's innocence. The world's longest fence. Built in 1885, it stretches some 5,300 kilometers across the southeast corner of Australia. It's specifically designed to stop four-footed predators invading from the north.
I think it'd have to be some other sort of predator that's had a go at these type of carcasses. You know, it's got to be a large predator that has the ability to just sort of take the head off with a massive jaw capacity.
A composite image emerges that highlights several unusual traits. The mysterious creature's jaw hinges like a snake's. Fawny brown fur, like a deer. And the stripes of a tiger. No Australian animal alive matches this description. But these features fit a native species that vanished over 75 years ago. The thylacine, alias the Tasmanian Tiger, now extinct. This thylacine was filmed in a Tasmanian zoo in 1933. It's supposed to be the last one on Earth. Thylacines differ from most carnivores. They're marsupials. Like kangaroos, they raise their young in a pouch and are exclusive to Australia. Murray has been fascinated by the thylacine for well over a decade. He has drawn up a controversial theory.
I don't think the thylacine is extinct at all. You know, I've had 20-odd sightings over my 12 years of research, and that keeps driving me. I wouldn't be doing this for 12 years if I didn't believe that the thylacine wasn't around.
Murray believes he's caught fleeting glimpses of the suspect on camera.
It was only a very small snippet of footage that we were able to obtain. So it's not conclusive enough. It's got to be in the right spot at the right moment, and I'm pretty confident that we will get what we want to get.
In Murray's mind, the dead kangaroos and their peculiar injuries indict the thylacine. It's believed the Tasmanian tiger's powerful jaws open up to 90 degrees. They could clamp their teeth around the neck of a kangaroo and shear the head clean off.
Taking the heads off the kangaroos is one of the unique traits of the thylacine. They're very clean. They don't tend to have much blood around the carcass either, so they lap up some of the blood as a nutrient.
The Tasmanian tiger's life is mysterious, and not just because no one's seen one for 75-odd years. Records from the 1800s describe the elusive animal as extremely shy and solitary. Catherine Medlock is an expert on the thylacine.
The thylacine was a mostly nocturnal animal, and it would have hunted basically any marsupials, any other animals smaller than itself. The thylacine stalked its prey for quite a long time and then wore it down and then killed it.
The arrival of large numbers of Europeans led to violent clashes with the thylacine, and eventually the Night Stalker's demise.
Tasmania was very keen to get a wool industry started for economic reasons. So when there were sheep losses, the thylacine was blamed, and quite outrageous claims were made about the thylacine killing and attacking and killing sheep.
The government put a price on the tiger's head. Half a week's wages per scalp.
Well over 2,000 animals were killed under this scheme. Their bodies were taken to the police stations where the bodies were destroyed, and that was really the beginning of the end for the thylacine.
It was hunted to near extinction. In July 1936, the species received official protection. But it was too little, too late. In less than 2 months, the last thylacine died. Now, over 75 years later, Murray's investigation suggests this may not have been the last Tasmanian tiger.
Right throughout the entire country, there's been these sporadic sightings that are actually coming through, which is really good, encouraging sign that they might be on a bit of a resurgence on mainland Australia.
You can't ignore what people say, but there's a lot of other factors there that need to be taken into account. We haven't any evidence of thylacines existing on the mainland, so it's extremely unlikely that there's thylacines there.
Remarkably, extinction may not be forever. A third of mammals declared extinct in the past few centuries have been found alive. In Africa, the okapi vanishes from Congo's national park in 1959. This zebra-striped relative of the giraffe suddenly reappears 47 years later. The yellow-tailed woolly monkey disappears from the cloud forests of the Peruvian Andes in the 1920s, only to be found again in 1974. Even in Australia, animals believed extinct do reappear. In 1937, the shy, bridled nail-tailed wallaby goes missing. Over 35 years later, a fencing contractor stumbles on a large group living in a secluded corner of a ranch in Queensland. Any Tasmanian tiger surviving outside captivity would need a place to hide out. And around Loch Sport, the killings continue. Murray decides to monitor the nearby forest.
There's plenty of wildlife out in the bush there for the thylacine to eat. Away from the population centre, there's just an enormous amount of tracts of vegetation that are unexplored by humans, and I think that really provides a safe haven for thylacines.
The tiger hunts possums and scavenges fish. Loch Sport has a vast belt of wetland. This is where the dogged detective's persistence is finally rewarded.
We had the camera and we were scouring the lake and we saw a number of kangaroos and everything out there. And then out to the glimpse to the right-hand side of the camera, we saw this unusual animal trotting around amongst the tussock grass and just sort of wandering around an area. So we managed to pan the camera over into that area.
Murray's footage captures a fast-moving creature in the distance. Under magnification, he makes out what may be stripes. For the investigator, the way the animal moves proves critical.
The early settlers used to say that they used to bound or gallop like a lion, and that's what I seem to think that I might have taken on that day, when it actually galloped and bound the last few strides that it actually took before it disappeared into the bush.
Murray pursues the trail into the wetlands to search for corroboration. Soft ground can yield hard evidence. Paw marks.
We've come across a number of footprints in certain areas. Some of the footprints are virtually the size of your hands, your two thumbs and your two pointing fingers put together. So they're fairly large prints.
Thylacine paws are unlike those of dogs and foxes. Murray believes plaster casts made at kill sites show distinct differences.
This is one that I'm pretty convinced that it is a Tasmanian tiger print because of the elongation of the toes. Okay, dogs tend to have a very round type of toe, and even cats and that, they're very round in terms of their pads that they've got.
Thylacine prints are distinctive. They're larger than a fox paw. The rear pad appears bigger than a dog's. And thylacine toes are long, with claws permanently extended. Let's review the evidence. Scissor-toothed jaws that stretch unusually wide.
I really think that taking the heads off the kangaroos is one of the unique traits of the thylacine.
Film of an unknown animal bounding across the grass. Footprints that don't appear to match any native living animal. But proof that an extinct animal exists has to pass the toughest tests.
It's very difficult to verify photographs and film and things like that. They can be manipulated, as we all know, quite easily. I guess the only thing that's going to prove it is an animal. I guess the mystery continues.
With no specimen in hand, Murray has not been able to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the thylacine is back. The cryptozoologist has no doubt more traces of the mystery marsupial are out there.
The sightings are becoming more and more convincing in terms of creating a dossier and evidence that the Tasmanian tiger still exists. So if we can keep targeting those things on an ongoing basis with more cameras and more technology, then I'm sure that eventually we'll be able to sound him out and get some conclusive photographs.
A beast from the past walking the earth? There is no incontrovertible proof. This case remains under investigation. March 8th, 2011, King Harbor, Redondo Beach. A town wakes to clear Californian skies, but something in the marina is very wrong.
We walked outside and there was just the massive, I mean, it was just phenomenal. I mean, we were just shocked.
You couldn't see the water. It was completely covered. There was fish everywhere.
They really seemed like you could walk on the sardine.
You couldn't see anything but dead fish. It was really, really sad.
Overnight, millions of sardines swim into the harbor and die. They float amongst the boats in a layer more than half a meter thick. The Redondo Beach Fire Department is quickly on the scene.
When I made my first reports, I said we have thousands of fish in the harbor. 2 or 3 minutes after that, I said we have hundreds of thousands of fish in the harbor. And by the end of it all, we had millions of fish in the harbor.
It was not anything that I've ever seen in my professional career. I just couldn't believe it.
35 kilometers south of Los Angeles, King Harbor sweeps out into the Pacific Ocean, protecting some 850 boats. There's a small entrance to the south. For an unknown reason, millions of sardines flood in from the ocean to pack themselves into a narrow basin.
The first question I had was, how did this happen and what caused it? Is there something in the water? Is this hazardous in terms of if we put a diver in there, are we going to compromise their health and safety? We just didn't know.
It was like any other morning when I get a call from the fire chief and he wanted me to come down the harbor. I said, I'm really busy. I really can't do that right now. He said, boss, you have to come down to the harbor.
As Redondo Beach City Manager, Bill Workman deals with many emergencies. Wildfires, oil spills, and train wrecks. But nothing like this. Bill's first thought is that a spill of fuel or chemicals has killed the fish in the harbor.
I didn't see any oil sheens. I didn't see any debris in the water that might have caused it, and we took a look at the water quality and didn't find any evidences of pollutants, so the mystery increased.
Millions of dead sardines will quickly create a lasting biohazard, harming marine life and human health. A cleanup operation begins, but workers struggle to dent the mountain of dead fish.
It was just a constant battle. And when we looked like we were getting a little bit of a handle on it, the tide would shift, agitate the water, more fish would float to the top, and the whole process would start over again. So very discouraging.
the water itself, marine biologist Brent Shawway examines the mass ashore for clues.
We did notice that some of the fish were still alive, so we actually kind of mobilized a group of our young people, our interns, and got them working on recovering some of those fish.
The surviving fish thrive. There is no sign they have been poisoned.
It couldn't be pollution at this point. We found no evidence of that. Couldn't find any toxins that were readily evident. So it was still a mystery to us, and we really had to count on some of our science experts at University of Southern California.
Professor David Caron is an expert on marine ecology. Analyzing available data, he puts a figure on the number of fish fatalities.
So in a space of this size, in a protected area like that, you might expect a handful of fish, maybe a few hundred. In this particular incident, they estimated that they removed about 1.5 million dead fish.
Professor Caron studies marine life and water quality in the coastal waters and harbors of California.
So we use sensor packages that tell us the temperature of the water, the salinity, how much salt is in the water. They also tell us dissolved oxygen. And in this particular case, that turned out to be a very important parameter to measure.
Water contains microscopic bubbles of oxygen. Fish are able to breathe this dissolved oxygen through their gills. Most fish thrive in water containing 5 to 9 milligrams of oxygen per liter. On the night of the die-off, Professor Caron is recording oxygen levels in King Harbor.
Clearly, this drop here shows is that there was a precipitous drop right at the time that the fish kill took place.
Professor Caron's graph provides evidence that as fish start to die, available oxygen is falling.
We did a very simple calculation asking, with a certain amount of oxygen utilization by this many fish in this volume of water, could they in fact have used the oxygen up in a relatively short period of time, say overnight? And the answer to that was absolutely yes.
A vast number of sardines crammed into a small area of the harbor used up all the oxygen and asphyxiated themselves.
Why so many fish kind of boxed themselves into such a small area and remain there, that's another question.
With water pollution ruled out and the surviving fish thriving, there are no obvious external clues to the sardines' fatal behavior.
You want to dissect the stomach out of this one?
Yes, so where should
Professor Caron delves inside the bodies of the fish for clues.
Surprisingly, we did find that the whole fish and the stomachs in particular had some toxin inside them. It's a neurotoxin called domoic acid.
Domoic acid is a naturally occurring neurotoxin produced by some species of plankton. Along the Californian coast, these tiny plant-like organisms can multiply into vast masses known as algal blooms. When seabirds and animals like sea lions swallow the deadly algae, the toxin can cause serious brain damage or death. Domoic acid harms humans too.
So with mild cases of domoic acid poisoning, organisms, including humans, can suffer nausea, they can suffer headaches. This, when it's consumed in shellfish, which is the normal way that humans might get it, is called amnesic shellfish poisoning because it causes loss of short-term memory.
Scientists are still exploring how domoic acid affects the brains of fish and whether the toxin alone could have caused the fish to become trapped in King Harbor.
With fish that are this small, it's still, speculative as to exactly what importance, if any, it has in the navigation of these fish.
Domoic acid may be a red herring. Other factors could drive sardines into the harbor. Sardines are low down in the food chain. Known as bait fish by fishermen and scientists, they're easy food for marine predators, including pelicans, sea lions, and Pacific mackerel.
Everyone's after a bait fish, basically. Your life as a bait fish is very stressful. You know, if you thought you're stressful at work, you should try being a bait fish. Every time you turn around, someone's trying to eat you.
Under attack, thousands of sardines crammed together into bait balls, swirling masses of fish, sometimes bigger than 4 school buses.
When you're only a little fish, you know, a few inches long, the more of you that can come together gives you a better chance of survival. Either through looking bigger, you know, when something comes along and there's a lot of you together, you look much larger to a predator, or just by bettering your odds. You know, if you're there and you have 10 people around you and the fish is going to eat one, then, you know, the more of you there are, the better odds you have of survival.
It's possible a massive bait ball was chased into King Harbor and then trapped. Fishermen out that night are convinced that's the answer.
That particular night, those fish were in this harbor. They virtually filled that harbor. I mean, there was probably more fish than water practically. But what's unusual about it is when they came in, the large mackerel came in behind them. As you can see, our opening of this harbor is very small. Sardines came in, the mackerel came in behind them, and they chased them. They couldn't, you know, they blocked the entrance. That many mackerel, they couldn't turn around and go out. They had only one way to go, and that was as far back as they could get away. And to have that many tons of both species at the same time was unusual. And that's why this happened.
Dave Karen thinks this is not the whole solution.
It's not unusual for a bait ball, you know, a ball of fish, shoaling fish like this, to group themselves very tightly if they're being chased by predators. But that density of fish typically occurs for a fairly short period of time, not over the course of days, and not typically at the very dead end part of a small basin like that northern basin of King Harbor. It's very difficult to understand why, if they had normal behavior, they would not have simply turned around and swum out after some period of time. Even random swimming behavior would have brought them out.
Why the fish became trapped in the harbor is still a mystery. Toxins and predators may be factors, but that's not the whole story. The sheer numbers of dead are overwhelming.
And this was really foul. It was about 3 days into it when the carcasses were on the rocks. We were doing our best, but the decay process was just staying ahead of us.
And then it was an extreme foul smell, to the point that we actually went to Home Depot and got ourselves some masks.
The case has reached a dead end. Then on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, something happens that changes the direction of the investigation. Three days after the sardine die-off, an earthquake measuring 9 on the Richter scale creates a powerful tsunami off the Japanese coast. "12 hours after the quake, shockwaves hit Redondo Beach.
The harbor waters dropped about 6 feet and then would rise about 6 feet within about a 30-minute period. We actually were seeing damage to our dock, tremendous energy. If you put your hand in the water, you could feel the energy that had been generated from Japan.
An incredible possibility arises. The fish may have felt the earthquake coming and seek shelter in King Harbor.
What we heard from the Asian news media was that the fish who died in Redondo Beach, the sardines, were being called earthquake fish, that they were actually a warning of the earthquake that was about to occur. Individuals said that the fish knew to swim towards the west coast to get away from the earthquake.
All fish detect energy and vibration using a unique line of sensors along their bodies.
We've done a lot of research, and fish have this lateral line. It's almost like an extra sense. It's a series of small pores, openings that is able to, basically monitoring the surroundings, the water around it, so that it can kind of tell what's going on without having to look around all the time.
In the days before the earthquake, a number of pre-shocks ripple across the Pacific.
Then these fish may have been detecting smaller, almost like warning systems that happened ahead of time, and their actions of moving into the harbour may have been to seek shelter from something that they thought was coming.
Evidence that fish can sense earthquakes is only circumstantial. The investigation needs solid leads. To explain the sardines' seemingly suicidal behavior, investigators examine other recent natural events. The day before the sardine die-off, strong winds batter the coast of California.
Just prior to this mortality event, literally the day before, we had a storm that came down from the north to the south. And the winds blowing down the length of our coastline actually caused an oceanographic condition called upwelling.
As strong winds blow down the Californian coast, warm, oxygen-rich surface waters are replaced by cold water dragged up from deep below the waves. These waters are also low in oxygen. This upwelling can actually affect the movement of fish.
And if that event is severe enough, it may well have pulled low oxygen water and perhaps even driven the sardines up into the inner reaches of King Harbor, perhaps to get away from that low oxygen water.
If oxygen levels in the harbor are low, it will accelerate the die-off. Upwelling could have forced the sardines into a death trap. This is another piece in the jigsaw. Let's review the evidence. Domoic acid poisoning may be a factor.
It's still, speculative as to exactly what importance, if any, it has in the navigation of these fish.
Masked predators could be to blame.
You had a very large amount of sardines and an extremely large amount of large mackerel.
A sixth sense may warn them of the coming tsunami.
The fish actually moved into the harbour a couple of days prior to the actual earthquake event.
Strong winds and a lack of oxygen might corral them in the harbour.
Literally the day before, we had a storm that came down from the north to the south.
No single theory fits all the facts. The pattern of evidence makes it likely that a combination of factors, a perfect storm of events, led 1.5 million sardines to their doom.
The best evidence that we have suggests that these fish were probably pushed in either by predators or by meteorological conditions. They got into the small basin, and the upwelling event, the movement of low oxygen, deeper waters up into the mouth of the harbor, really prevented the fish from moving out or wanting to move out. And they then essentially were trapped in an area where they used up the oxygen and caused their own death.
Together, all these factors make the sardine die-off possible.
This was a pretty amazing event. I've never seen anything like this before, and I don't think I'll ever see anything like this again.
Case closed. Minnesota, the city of liner lakes. Peltier Island hosts one of the largest super colonies of great blue herons in the U.S. Food is plentiful in the lake, which attracts flocks of birds. Over 2,000 herons nest in the forest canopy. Their distinctive mating calls echo for miles around. The birds are the icon of neighboring lino lakes.
Blue herons are extremely important culturally. As you can see, they're on our light poles out here, they're on our city truck doors, they're on our water tower.
Lino Lake City Hall has that as an emblem, and a lot of people here, they all know the herons, so it is like a community mascot.
But now, the living symbol of the community is suffering a terrible blow. During the breeding season, a dramatic change comes over the lakes. There's silence. An eerie stillness descends, created by 2,000 herons disappearing. The mystery hits the townspeople of Lino Lakes hard. Their birds are missing. Amy Hawkins' father was a keen heron watcher and the first to raise the alarm.
I remember him coming home and telling us, just doesn't look right. The colony looks very, very quiet. I don't know why there's not more activity up there.
In trees 15 meters tall, the island colony has been a safe sanctuary for herons until now. Park manager Jeff Perry takes a bird's eye view of the heron colony, looking for clues. At this time of year, he expects the treetops to be full of great blue heron nests. Jeff has a shock in store.
It was devastating. It essentially looked like a ghost town. There were old nests that were falling apart. It was eerie how quiet it was in that colony. We were really scratching our heads trying to figure out what the cause of that was.
Hundreds of nests are empty. No breeding pairs and no chicks are to be seen.
We didn't really know what was going to happen and why it was happening.
It became a very important issue to the people of Lino Lakes.
People were very upset that the colony was declining. They were vocal about it, and they were looking to the local wildlife officials to take action.
Jeff's under pressure to find out why the colony has vanished. He focuses his investigation on the surrounding waters. As well as an abundance of bird life, the lake attracts over 3.5 million visitors a year.
I think noise plays a factor in heron colony abandonment. The closer the humans get, the more apt the herons are to leave their nests and abandon their young.
First, the investigation focuses on noise levels across the island. One activity stands out above the rest.
When a boat at a higher speed travels close to the island, decibel readings were up over 100 decibels, and that was causing somewhat of a disturbance to the birds at that time.
Sustained exposure to 100 decibels can cause hearing loss even in humans. To test if noise levels are keeping the herons away, Jeff establishes an exclusion zone. Motorboats can no longer travel within 180 meters of the island where the birds make their home. Noise readings fall, but the herons fail to return.
We were not seeing any successful breeding and nesting activities that were occurring on the island. It continued to rack my brain to try to find out why was it declining.
Loud noise isn't the culprit. Jeff looks for new clues on the island itself. He comes across fresh evidence lying right on the ground.
We were finding a lot of feather piles on the ground, a lot of eggshells. It really raised a lot of questions.
The eggshells are significant. They confirm that the herons have been breeding this past spring. But there are no signs of life. Jeff calls in conservationist Andy Von Dyke. Arriving on the island, he uncovers disturbing evidence.
Right at the base of the tree, where my base station was the severed head of a great blue heron.
The eggshells and severed head must have fallen from an abandoned nest. Someone or something is attacking the herons. Andy sets about tracking down the unknown assailant. 5 stories up.
It seemed like everything really boiled down to what was happening within the nest. So if we could monitor with just the activity and behavior of the birds within the nest, then that would open the door to figuring out what's going on.
They trace the few herons that remain. Andy positions cameras at the scene of the crime to catch the perpetrator. He has a prime suspect in mind, and it's another bird.
Okay, you can pull it up. Avian predation was actually pretty high at the top of the list, in my opinion, just because there's so many different predators in this region.
The predation hit list includes egg smash and grab experts, gulls, and crows. Andy has a hunch a different species cuts off heron heads, one that has a real killer instinct.
And great horned owls were actually top of my list, just because they're common and they are such an efficient predator.
Great horned owls prey on a wide variety of creatures. They take out domestic birds and even falcons. Their powerful talons are 10 times stronger than the grip of a human hand. They crush the life out of their prey. The investigators set up a spy cam.
Okay, Joel, can you move that camera a little bit to the left?
At first, there's no sign of the killer. Andy only records potential victims, vulnerable heron chicks.
That's good, right there.
The footage is not yet conclusive, but there's circumstantial evidence that the threat is real.
One of our tree climbers flushed a nearly fully grown owl chick out of a heron nest. He found several dead heron chicks, and so that certainly tipped us off that great horned owls were at least one factor involved.
They now know that an owl has been attacking the heron chicks, but it takes more than one offending owl to decimate a whole colony.
I was fairly convinced that I would see a lot more owls on the cameras. I was very interested to review my data that evening and see what actually happened in the nest.
Andy plays back his footage. There's no killer owl on camera. Instead, at the bottom of the screen, a shadowy figure materializes inside the nest. You can see it attack and kill a heron chick. At last, Andy has caught the killer, red heron.
The first time I saw the raccoon in the nest, I guess I would have to say I was very surprised. Given the size of the chicks when compared to the size of the raccoon, it was really shocking actually to see a raccoon take 1 or 2 chicks that were as large as it was.
More spy cam footage places other raccoons at the scene of the crimes, while the parents look on, powerless. Once the chicks are slaughtered, the adult herons abandon the nest. The ravenous raccoons move on to their next victim.
I had no idea that they had the capabilities of predating on great blue herons. To see the aggressive nature of these raccoons pouncing on these herons and literally taking them out for a food source was amazing.
How could the killers get across the lake in the first place? Raccoons are notorious scavengers. Black facial fur and an opportunistic nature earn them their nickname, the masked bandits. Their natural habitat is woodland, but they've forced their way into cities after easy pickings. They're not fussy eaters. Many people deride them as pests, but raccoon expert Phil Jenny maintains they're misunderstood.
The reason that I admire them more than anything else is just their sheer athletic ability, coupled with tremendous innate curiosity. They're always playing with stuff, and they'll play in the water.
It's the raccoon's ability to adapt that's brought them to the island. They've become spring and summer residents, having learned that great blue heron nests make for an easy meal.
The raccoons are swimming a half a mile from mainland across to the island, which is a pretty good swim for a raccoon.
Raccoons are comfortable in water. Strong limbs developed for climbing power them across the lakes. But this could be a record-breaking swim.
The behavior of the raccoons, to my knowledge, was never documented anywhere else. It was an eye-opener, it was a surprise, and they are certainly going over there with a pretty good appetite for herons.
Andy's determined to fight back on behalf of the great blue herons. He aims to stop the raccoon attacks in their tracks. And he has a secret weapon. He plans to exploit the raccoon's weak point.
Their climbing is pretty adapted, but it's very difficult for them to climb on shiny, smooth surfaces.
Attaching metal flashing to trees where herons nest is an untried solution. Only time will tell if it can succeed. And 6 years later, and the heron numbers are rising.
It's been great. I mean, we've had more active nests and more chicks survive in the last 8 years or so.
Going from 0 chicks up to approximately 70 successful chicks that hatched out here this spring. Of course, we're just, ecstatic.
The Lino Lakes icon is flying high again.
This is the first year that we've really been successful, and our nest numbers doubled this year, so very, very good. We feel good about the work that's been done out on the island.
Because of everyone's hard work, we have a huge colony again, and it'll be the glory days of Lino Lakes with the big herons on the towers, and our birds will be back, and that will be a really happy time for all of us.